ParshaCast.com presents.
It's the 26th of January, 2017, the 29th of Tevet, 5777. The Parsha is Va'era. I'm Eitan Guten. Our special guest this week is Mike Scheinberg, and this is the ParshaCast. Bruchim habayim, welcome to episode 12 of the ParshaCast. You can find the ParshaCast on Facebook under ParshaCast. You can also visit ParshaCast.com, where you can listen to past episodes, watch past videos, sign up for the mailing list, or become a ParshaCast patron for $2 or more per month. And if you go to our website or Facebook page right now, you can click on a link and participate in the first ever ParshaCast poll on this week's Parsha. Now, just so you know, there will be a bonus Friday this week in addition to today's ParshaCast, but in the meantime, let's get straight to our guest. Mike Scheinberg is a former Hillel professional who, in addition to working in the private sector, has taught religious school and regularly staffs events for United Synagogue Youth, for USY. Since 2011, he and his Muslim co-host Faika Khan have been exploring each other's traditions and viewpoints with plenty of laughter on their podcast, Hey, That's My Hummus, which recently reached its 100th episode. Mike lives in Alexandria with his wife Kira and their teenage son Avi, and is my very first guest who is not a full-time professional in the Jewish community. So I'd like to welcome Mike to the program. Mike, thank you for joining me here on the ParshaCast this week.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
So as I said in the introduction, one of the things you do is you have this podcast, and it's called Hey, That's My Hummus. And I'm wondering if you could tell the viewers and listeners of the ParshaCast about your contribution to the Jewish media world.
Sure. It started with a friend of mine who I met blogging. Her name is Faika Khan, and I would say that she has a very similar view to her Muslim identity as I do to my Jewish identity. Mm-hmm. And we both found that we were doing some blogging about certain types of customs and traditions that we've had, and we were really good at explaining these things, and we were really good at explaining them in a very humorous way. And we decided we would team up. First we were thinking, it's like, should we write a book about little known customs about our own religions? But then we realized probably the best thing which we could do is really have a dialogue and be able to really reach out to each other. And as the time's gone by, I think we found certain times that we really felt that being able to really make sure that people can see that we have a dialogue. People can see that that we're friends. People can see that we can ask each other questions. That became a critical thing for us to be able to do. So We've been doing it since 2011. We've taken a couple breaks, but we've come on back now. And basically, we just have some fun. We talk about a lot of different things, whether it has to do with our own identities, whether it has to do with current events. And one time we talked about hummus, actually.
What time you actually did talk about it? Where did the name come from?
The name came from our first episode. Back in 2011, there was a very big story about the dining hall at Princeton University, and they had Sabra Hummus as one of their vendors. Mm-hmm. And one of the organizations there said that was not good to be able to have, and they wanted to have a non-Israeli brand of hummus to be sold also. And then because of that became a very big joke for us. Whose hummus is it anyway? And we decided we would just call it something like that because this is something which is shared amongst many different traditions. We all have our own ownership of it. And we just had a little bit of a play on it that we can kind of teasingly, throw it back and forth. Hey, that's my hummus.
Oh, that sounds great. Sounds wonderful. And for people watching or listening, I'm going to make sure that there's a link along with this video or along with the audio so that you can find Hey, That's My Hummus when you want to look for it after listening to this discussion of the Parsha.
Sure.
So let's jump right into the Parsha. This week is Va'era. There's a lot, it's because it's the opening of Shemot, because it's the opening of Exodus, it's all story pretty much. So which part of the story do you want to focus on?
Well, just as a little bit of a summary, it really starts with last week we had Shmot, where we talked about the origin story of Moshe and of Moses being able to come up and then eventually be able to then approach Pharaoh. We start now with a story with, I guess, more of the midrash of Moses not really being a great talker and of Aaron really being his communicator by his side. And one of the first things which we see here is a story of Aaron and Moses approaching Pharaoh, saying, "Let my people go." And then Aaron then shows his stuff by taking his staff and throwing it to the ground, and it turns into a serpent. And then Pharaoh's magicians say, hey, "We can do the same thing." And then the staff itself swallows theirs up and turns back into a staff. Something which is interesting, and I talked to my co-host on Hey, That's My Hummus about this, is there is a slightly different story which is related, I would say, which is in the Quran, which I wanted to see if I could share as well. The Quran, by the way, it has very similar but also some very different aspects to it. For example, this parak, this surah, which is what they call it, which is called Al-Araf, which happens to be the seventh one.
So surah is a chapter? Okay.
Right. But as we usually have our chapters, which might be 30, 40, 50 verses, this one is 206. So in terms of how it goes, also, these are sayings from the Prophet Muhammad, and in terms of some of the teachings that happened there. So this was really put into the form of a parable, and it talks about the reason why Muslims should be believing in Allah. Muslims should be able to believe, and what happens if they don't believe. So there was a parable that was told at this point where he says those were the towns whose stories, let's see, and then they came to their messengers with clear proof that they weren't such to believe what they had rejected before. Thus Allah does steal up the hearts of the disbelievers from every kind of guidance. And most of them we found not true to their covenant. They weren't believers, but we found them to be fasikun, which is rebellious. And then after we sent Musa, which is Moses, with our signs to Pharaoh and his chiefs, but they wrongfully rejected him. See how it was the end of the Mufsidin, which is the mischief makers. And then it talks about what Moses then says. Musa said to, O Pharaoh, I'm a messenger from the Lord of Alamin, which kind of like Olamim. The earth. Proper it is for me to say that nothing concerning Allah but the truth. Indeed, I have come to you from your Lord with a clear proof. So let the children of Israel depart along with me. Let my people go, pretty much.
Let my people go, right.
Right. Pharaoh said, if you've come with a sign, show forth. If you are one who tells the truth. Then Musa threw his stick. Right, exactly. Then Musa threw his stick, and keep in mind this isn't Aaron, and behold, it was a serpent, manifest. And he drew out his hand, and behold, it was white with radiance to its beholders. The chiefs of the people of Pharaoh, those are the magicians, said, this is indeed a well-versed sorcerer. He wanted to go out of your land, so what do you advise? They said, put him and his brother off for a time, and send callers, men, to the cities to collect, that they can bring up all your well-versed sorcerers. So in that case, they said, we don't have our sorcerers here. Let's get them. Let's get reinforcements.
So they engage in a delaying tactic to make sure they can stack the deck on their behalf when they're in competing with Moses' sorcery.
Exactly. They want to make sure that they have even talent there. So the sorcerers came to Pharaoh. They said, indeed, there will be a good reward for us if we are the victors. So in this case, it's not just that they're there. This is, hey, how is Pharaoh going to reward us if we're able to challenge this staff turning into a serpent? He said, yes, and moreover, you will in this case be the nearest to me. They said, oh, Moses, either you throw first, or should we have the first throw? I find that interesting, too. It's like, okay, let's try this again. Who's going to go first? Heads or tails? Hey, Moses said, throw you first. So when they threw, they bewitched the eyes of the people and struck terror into them, and they displayed a great magic. And we inspired Musa, saying, throw your stick, and behold, it swallowed up straight away all the falsehoods which they showed. It doesn't necessarily say that they had serpents there, but it said these are falsehoods. These are perhaps false elements of magic. So it doesn't say specifically that it swallowed up a symbol like a serpent. It says it swallowed up the falsehoods. Thus the truth was confirmed, and all they did was made of no effect. So they were defeated there, and then we were returned disgraced. And the sorcerers fell down prostrate. They said, we believe in the Lord of Alamin. We believe in God. The Lord of Musa and Aaron, that's who they believe in. So the sorcerers are already on our side in that case.
Mm-hmm.
Pharaoh's not happy.
That's a much more typical, that's a much more standard conversion story.
Yes.
Than what goes. Our text isn't the story in Torah is not concerned with convincing Pharaoh that our God is the God. In fact, the text takes advantage of Pharaoh's rejection of that idea and how it treats Pharaoh. And Pharaoh's magicians are Pharaoh's magicians are, you could look at them as the comic relief. That's how they're sometimes used when there's movie versions of this, for example. They're there to fail, basically. Their job is to be the failure, to fail things on a regular basis. By the way, just so you know, I was looking while you were looking in the Quran source. I was looking real quick at the Torah, and it doesn't say in the Torah that Moshe's snake or Aaron's snake swallows the other snakes. The actual word is Vayivla mate Aharon et matotam. Aaron's staff swallowed the other staffs. So actually, it's not necessarily a massive gap in the stories. Like we think of it in terms of the way we tell, and this happens all the time. We think of it in terms of the way we tell the story. The way we tell the story, the way we portray it in media, is that the snake from Moshe's staff is thrown down by Aaron, eats the other ones. The staff consumes the other staffs, which has way more space for interpretation than the snake consuming the other snakes.
And doesn't make nearly as good special effects.
No.
Which is why that's how we perceive it. You're right. It is a staff eating a staff. It's a symbol overcoming another symbol. Mm-hmm. You were talking about the other sorcerers being the comic relief. I actually, this is where it gets interesting, because at this point it says that we believe in the Lord of Musa and Harun.
We're not worthy.
Exactly. Pharaoh said, "You have believed in him, Moses, before I gave you permission. Surely this is a plot which you have plotted our city to drive out its people. You have come to know. Surely I will cut off your hands and feet on opposite sides, and I will crucify you all." He's saying, "Hey, you guys are defecting. Mm-hmm. You guys, you have a plot against me, and you want to just rid everybody and have them go with him. I'm not going to have any of that. So therefore, you're going to get punished." They said, "Verily, we were returning to our Lord." You know what? Our bad. We're going to return to our Lord.
Pharaoh says, so sorry, let me interrupt. Sorry for interrupting. So the Quranic text says that do they begin to worship Moses, or do they begin to worship God?
They began to, they were worshiping the Lord of Musa and Harun.
Oh, the Lord of Musa. Okay, yeah.
Right. So they were taking a look that way. And then they said, "And you take vengeance on us only because we believed in the ayat," which are the proofs and the evidence of our Lord when they reached us. Our Lord, pour on its patience and cause us to die as Muslims. So in this case, they're saying, keep in mind, once again, this is what Muhammad is saying in this case. Mm-hmm. We need to die as Muslims. We need to really have that belief. The chief of Pharaoh's people said, "Will you leave Musa and the people to spread mischief in the land and to abandon you and your gods?" He said, "We will kill their sons and let their women live, and we will indeed have irresistible power over them." So there's a power struggle here going on between Pharaoh and his men. Mm-hmm. At that point, and this is towards the end of it, Musa said to his people, "Seek help in Allah and be patient. Verily, the earth is Allah's. He gives it as heritage to whom he will his slaves, and the blessed end is for the mutakun, for the pious." They said, "We, the children of Israel, have suffered troubles before you came to us, and since you have come to us," he said, "it may be the Lord who destroys your enemy and makes your successors on the earth, so he may see how you act." At this point, they're saying, Bnei Israel, children of Israel, why is this happening? Because we're trying to figure out if you believe. We need to have that test, which is going on. So this is a conversation that Moses is having with them, trying to establish faith. Mm-hmm. And indeed, we punish the people of Pharaoh, with years of drought and shortness of his fruits, crops, etc., that they may remember, take heed. But whenever good came of him, he said, "Ours is this." And if evil afflicted them, they ascribed to evil omens connected with Musa and those with him. Be informed, verily, the evil omens are with Allah, but most of them know not. Hey, if everything's going okay our way, then that's fine. That's our God. If anything's really going wrong, that's Moses' problem. It's nice shift of blame there.
So even the Quran, Moshe gets all the blame.
Moshe gets all the blame here. Right. 2 more verses. They said to Musa, whatever ayat, whatever proofs you may bring to us to work therein with your sorcery with us, we shall never believe in you. So all this stuff, all this negative stuff that you're going to be able to put upon us, no, we're not going to believe in that. We have our own belief system. So we went on to them, the flood, the locusts, the lice, the frogs, and the blood, as a succession of manifest signs, yet they remained arrogant, and they were those people who were Mijurim, who were the criminals. And when the punishment fell on them, they said, O Musa, invoke your Lord for us because of his promise to you. If you remove the punishment for us, then we will believe in you, and we shall let the children of Israel go with you. But when we removed the punishment from them to a fixed term, which they had reached, behold, they broke their word.
It's clear how, to me it's clear that the purpose of sharing this story in the Quranic text is very different from the purpose of sharing this story in the Torah.
Yep. And it really has a lot more to do with faith than a narrative of somebody delivering Bnei Israel, somebody delivering the children of Israel out of the land. This has to do with, are you going to believe in me? Are you going to believe in the wonders that I have? Because that in itself is going to be your freedom.
There's also the element there of Moshe as the representative of the true God.
Right.
Moshe as the representative of the true way to be. The description of how the magicians immediately start falling and bowing when they see that miracle, that happens in Hasidic stories.
Yeah.
It's exactly the structure of a whole bunch of stories of early Hasidism where you'd have the skeptic and then the Baal Shem Tov or one of his students does something magical and the skeptic becomes the disciple, basically. That's a standard form of stories where it's one, I'm forgetting the word, of course. It's one charismatic individual who is bringing people to God instead of, in the Torah version of how the Jewish people became God's people, the entire people experiencing something as a whole, that it's the group. We often talk about how it's the group experience that turns us into Bnei Yisrael. Also, the Quran is much less concerned with nationalistic aspirations than the Torah is.
Well, the Quran also comes after another book that came out after the Torah itself, and it uses as its prophets Musa, Moshe, and it also uses Jesus as a prophet as well. So the notion of somebody being out there to be the magician, to be able to be the miracle man, is not something which is foreign to them. And I think that they already have that narrative in there, that it's not as much of a leap for them to believe in this this person who is able to perform the miracles on behalf of God.
Now, why do you think the Quran picks those 4 plagues plus the extra? So the extra is the flood, and what are the other 4 again that it has?
They are, and this, by the way, for those of you following along, this is Surah number 7, Al-Araf, and this is verse 133. Okay. So we have the flood, locusts, lice, frogs, and blood. So I've read about this, trying to find out what they were. If you take the last 3 and you put the reverse order, you have blood, frogs, and lice. So Dam, Sfardea, Kinim. Yeah, it's exactly the reverse order, which is interesting. And then from there, then you have the locusts and the flood. And I was reading a little bit more about this in terms of when they think about the flood, they think that this might have been another flood story that came through. But if you read the verse beforehand, it talks about how the crops will be destroyed. And I think that in itself, while the 10 plague story that we know within the Jewish narrative has to do with these plagues of showing where God is at and showing what the powers of God are, in this case, it has to do with, we're going to destroy your infrastructure first. We're going to have a flood that's going to flood out your crops. We're going to have locusts who are going to be eating all your grain. So your food's going to be gone. Your revenue source, your food source is going to be gone. And then from there, then you have the lice and the frogs and the blood, these symbols of God is powerful. So I think that in itself is also a very different way of taking a look at it, as that not Pharaoh being the one who is being attacked here, but Pharaoh's infrastructure first. And then from there, after that, then it's Moses saying, "This is what we can do."
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting. That's really, really interesting. Does the Quran then get into the Exodus story itself?
It gets a little bit into it, and it does talk about how Pharaoh is then drowns within the sea, within the flood. Actually, let's see if I can find that. It does, and this, we took retribution to them. We drowned them in the sea because they believed they belied our ayat, our proofs, and were heedless about them. So instead of just, Pharaoh sunk into the sea like a stone, and because of that, it's not that they were chasing us and we had to leave. It was we sunk them in the sea because they were non-believers. Mm-hmm. And then we made the people who consider weak into inherit the eastern parts of the land. And then it talks about that point, what we usually see at the end of the Magid story, the foretelling of the story in the Haggadah, that basically then it talks about being able to inherit the land. Mm-hmm. And in this case, it says the eastern parts and the western parts. So the same thing as we see in terms of what we call Eretz Zava Chalav Uvash, the land of milk and honey. They talk about this in more geographic terms.
But that's also fascinating, though, that for our tradition, while one of the roles of the plagues is to demonstrate God's might, the other role of the plagues is to put political pressure on Pharaoh to let the people go. That's right. What the plagues are meant to do, to get Pharaoh to the point where Pharaoh lets us go, no strings attached. And then the story at the edge of the sea has nothing to do with the Egyptians' faith. The story at the edge of the sea has to do with our faith and Moshe's faith. The Midrash expands on it, but it's a story of the faith of the Jewish people. It has nothing to do with who the Egyptians are worshiping or the Egyptians care about. They're just the bad guys. They're the antagonists.
Right.
Their job is to show up and die.
Right. In this case, they're showing up and being disbelievers. Mm-hmm. So that's why the Prophet Muhammad then said, this is... You know exactly who you're supposed to be like here. You have to have the faith. You have to believe, and that's what's going to save you. Mm-hmm. Not like them, which is different from our story, where faith certainly has the big part of it, as you had mentioned as well. You need to have faith. You need to have the Nachshon. Nachshon being of the tribe of Yehuda, right? Of Judah. So. Okay, but he was the one who went in first and went up to his nostrils in water before everything parted.
That's the Midrash.
It is Midrash.
But,
you're right.
But what that also is, and this also can be the case for these stories, because the Midrashim on these stories do tend to get a little bit more into what was the state of Moshe's faith. What was the state of the faith of the people? The Midrashim get into that much more than the original text does, which probably shows how Judaism itself evolved over time, how the meaning of the story evolved over time, where at some point it became important to examine what was the state of this character's faith or of the people's faith at various points. It became more important to examine that in depth on top of the story itself. Right. And then you get to then you get to the time period of the Quran. The Quran is all about faith.
Yeah.
When it talks about this story, the good guy bad guy dynamic, even the hero's journey dynamic for Moshe, all of that is secondary to it being a story about convincing people to have faith and then punishing the unbelievers.
And in fact, this entire chapter, all 208 verses of it, really goes through a very quick narrative of what we see within the Hebrew scripture, within what would we call the Old Testament, because it starts with Noah and the flood story. And then it goes on to Ibrahim, and then it just goes very, very quickly into the belief that they had. And then from there, then we have to make sure that everybody retains their belief, because if you don't, then you're going to end up like the Egyptians. And then it goes right into the Moses story. So I think that specifically for this specific surah, for this specific chapter, I think that that's really what they're focusing on, is these miracles do happen, and the reason why is because the belief system should be there.
And you don't get a miracle if you don't have faith, or at least the miracle doesn't. If you're not one of the faithful, the miracle isn't for you.
Right.
On the contrary, it might be divine punishment instead of divine salvation.
You don't want to sink in the sea.
No,
basically.
you don't want to sink. I would prefer not to sink in the sea. Yeah.
Not so much.
Swim in the sea, yeah, not sink in the sea.
Dead Sea, that's a challenge, but
Oh wow, that's really fascinating. I've learned the differences in the Akedah story. We talk about that all the time in the Jewish community. When we talk about the Quran in the Jewish community and we talk about Bible stories, we almost always talk about the Akedah.
Well, that's because that you have our cousins there, I guess, right in the same, and that's the first thing which people think of when they think of everything diverging. Mm-hmm. But what they don't realize is that things really don't diverge. Things kind of break off. Things still stay together and they break off later. Mm-hmm. And that some of these stories are really going to be stories that they're going to be able to know as well. When I had asked Fika about what she knew about the Ten Commandments, mm-hmm. and the 10 plagues rather.
Okay.
What she knew was basically from what she watched from the 10 Commandments. And she happened to know the story, but she didn't know really in detail what it said here because it's just such a short story within this chapter. In terms of, I asked her, what are those plagues? And she said she didn't know. She would have to actually read them and find out.
Yeah, it's just a list of 5 things.
Because every year we do the thing with the wine and Svardea. So, it's a very different type of feeling there too, but they still certainly do have that tradition with them.
Fascinating. So thank you for bringing this with you. I learned all sorts of new things. I love how the Quranic text adds depth to answering the question of why is this story in the Torah? What is the purpose of this story? Which is one of my favorite questions to ask. The Quranic text presenting it differently then helps to frame why it's in the Torah versus why it appears in the Quran, and that's always great to gain a deeper understanding of our own text and to learn a bit about somebody else's. So thank you for coming and for bringing this with you, and I want to thank you for coming to the ParshaCast and wish you a Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Once again, Mike's podcast, Hey That's My Hummus, can be found at heythat'smyhummus.com, hummus spelled Hummus, on Facebook at Hey That's My Hummus, and on Twitter, once again, at Hey That's My Hummus. And that's it for this week's show. I hope you'll join me for Bonus Friday, for Midrash Monday, and for next week's ParshaCast. In the meantime, for more information about everything ParshaCast, please visit ParshaCast.com. Have a great week, and have a Shabbat Shalom.